Hello, this is my persuasive speech, and it is titled, Time to Change Your Meat-Based Diet. At this moment, if you consume meat, you are in danger, which is a sad reality for most Americans because according to the World Economic Forum, in 2018, America was the leading consumer of meat, with Australia coming in second. And according to the Cove Creek Farms, in 2018, Americans consumed on average 222 pounds of meat a year. Now, to give you a better understanding of this, that is just a little over 0.6 pounds of meat a day. The problem that emerges from meat consumption is not just of one's health, it's also the health of the environment as well as the health of the animals from which we consume. Like many people who eat meat, myself included, we rarely stop to think where our meat comes from, what the animals have endured, what they are fed, and the carbon footprint that we leave behind for the sole purpose to enjoy the taste of meat. Many will argue that meat is essential for our diets because of the amount of protein and vitamins that it offers us. But while this is true, it is not the only way that we can attain those nutrients for our body. Over the next few minutes, I will explain why a meat-based diet is more harmful than it is beneficial, not just to our bodies, but to our planet and the lives of the animals which we consume. I will also go over some ways we can help end this problem. As I mentioned before, Americans are the leading consumers of meat, making us a major part of the problem. According to the Innovation Center of U.S. Dairy, a report found that 7% of Americans think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Now, why is this important? This is important because it shows the lack of knowledge Americans have when it comes to the food that we consume. Although 7% seems small, when you look at the overall millions of people in the U.S., it's a pretty big number. This is only talking about milk. What about where our meat comes from? This is when we are even more agriculturally illiterate because we do not know the process that our meat has undergone to get to our plate. The U.S. alone exploits and slaughters over 10 billion animals each year. Most of these animals live miserable lifestyles in overcrowded factory farms, which are breeding grounds for disease, including emerging pathogens and bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics. Cows, which are designed to graze out in open pastures, are sentenced to crowded lifestyles where they are fed improper foods such as corn and soy, which they are not able to digest on their own. This leads to the cows getting sick and in need of antibiotics, which we then consume through their meat products. The CDC warns that 3 out of every 4 new emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. These include viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites that infect millions of U.S. citizens each year. This information, while shocking, is not surprising given the living conditions that the animals have undergone. According to PETA, when these birds are very young, approximately 1 to 10 days old, they take hot blades, which are used to cut off a portion of their beaks, which are very sensitive. This is so that they won't peck at each other from the frustration that is caused by the intense confinement which they are subjected to. Sometimes their toes, their spurs, or their combs are also cut off. These birds are not given any painkillers to ease the agony from the mutilation, and many of the de-beaked chickens die from starvation because it is just too painful to eat. Tens of thousands of chickens are bred and kept in large sheds that have no windows, and the only time that they see the sunlight is when they get loaded up to the truck to head to the slaughterhouse. This brings me to my next point that I will talk about, one's health in relations to the food that we consume. The CDC estimates that each year, 48 million people get sick from foodborne illnesses. 128,000 of them are hospitalized, and 3,000 of them unfortunately result in death. Experts believe that the H1N1 was likely caused by an overcrowding of pigs on factory farms and the storage of their waste in giant manure lagoons that were left nearby them, breeding ground for infections. Many foodborne illnesses that humans contact come from the poor conditions in which these animals live in. They become sick and are pumped with antibiotics as well as growth hormones to get them bigger so that they can survive in these living conditions that breed bacteria. These bacteria end up in our meat, and as a result, we become sick, or even worse, sometimes pandemics can happen from how severe things can get. Furthermore, the damage is not only done to ourselves and our animals, but our planet suffers. Meat and dairy specifically are accountable for 14.5% of the global greenhouse emissions, according to the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. That is 1.5 times more the amount of all other agriculture combined, including fruits, vegetables, nuts, which is only around 10%. According to the Carbon Brief, the conservation of land and beef products is the leading cause for deforestation in many tropical regions, including the Amazon, which was recently caught on fire, and the clearing of the forest has been linked to cattle ranching, meaning that they will cut down trees in areas so that they will have more land to house these livestock. Going vegan would be the best solution, but it is difficult for many to do such a drastic change. That is why I would suggest that we go vegetarian. If one can go vegan, it will benefit the individual. According to the Farm Sanctuary, vegans enjoy lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, lower risk of heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. Not to mention that also a lower risk for certain cancers. If this is not doable, being vegetarian would benefit a lot of the problems that emerge from farming livestock, such as reducing one's individual carbon footprint, as well as no longer adding to the meat industry's emissions. Now let's take a look. Eliminating the transport of food for 1 year could be equivalent to the emissions of driving 1,000 miles, while shifting to a vegetarian meal 1 day a week could save the equivalent of driving 160 miles. 1,160 miles. Saving water is also another key factor when you go vegetarian. According to PETA, it takes more than 2,400 gallons to produce 1 single pound of meat, while, in the contrary, it only takes about 302 gallons of water for a single pound of tofu. Nearly 90% less water. You could save more water by avoiding eating 1 pound of steak than going 6 months without showering. Now that is crazy. You also save hundreds of millions of animals that are bred specifically so that they can spend their entire lives in barbaric living conditions, which, as mentioned before, are breeding grounds for disease that can be easily transferred to humans once we consume their meat products. To sum things up, a meat-based diet is linked to many things that harms our planet, our animals, and ourselves. Because most consumers have little knowledge of the inner operations of an industrialized, globalized food system, they need a greater understanding of how foods get to their plate, the fossil fuels involved, the exploitation of animals. This is why I believe that it is important for me to share the information that I have provided you today and why we should change our meat-based diets. Even with making small diet changes, it can go a long way, as mentioned previously. Any steps taken towards saving water and emitting less greenhouse gases is something positive. This will ultimately benefit our future generations, even if it is just replacing one meat-based meal with a vegetarian one from time to time. Thank you for listening.